The scorching sun of Death Valley held a cruel irony for the Harper family, for their journey there began not with dread, but with the boundless optimism of a long-cherished dream. Daniel Harper, a quiet man with a meticulous nature and a passion for American history, had spent years poring over maps and guidebooks, meticulously planning a grand cross-country adventure. His wife, Sarah, a vibrant and artistic soul who found beauty in every landscape, had embraced his vision with equal fervor, her sketchbook already filled with imagined vistas of canyons and deserts. Their 9-year-old son, Ethan, a whirlwind of boundless energy and insatiable curiosity, was perhaps the most enthusiastic of all. For him, the journey was a real-life treasure hunt, a chance to explore the wild spaces he'd only read about in adventure novels. Their home, a cozy, unassuming house nestled in a tree-lined street of a small, forgotten town in rural Pennsylvania, felt suddenly too small for their burgeoning aspirations. It was a place of comforting routines, of soccer practice and school plays, but the Harpers yearned for something more, a shared experience that would forge an unbreakable bond and leave an indelible mark on their collective memory. Their travels had led them through majestic forests, across vast plains, and past towering mountains, each stop a new wonder for Ethan and a source of quiet contentment for Daniel and Sarah. Yet it was Death Valley, with its ominous name and stark beauty, that Daniel had always envisioned as the dramatic crescendo of their trip. Friends and family had raised eyebrows, their voices laced with concern. They spoke of the oppressive heat, the unforgiving aridity, the vast, desolate expanses where life seemed to cling to existence by the thinnest of threads. "It's no place for a child," some had warned, their words echoing the inherent danger of the landscape. But Daniel, ever the researcher, had assured them of his thorough preparations, of the detailed itinerary, the abundant water supplies, the precise timing to avoid the worst of the summer's fury. Sarah, while perhaps harboring a faint tremor of apprehension beneath her outward enthusiasm, trusted her husband implicitly. She saw the allure in the stark contrasts, the silent majesty of a place sculpted by millennia of extreme forces. For Ethan, the very name, Death Valley, held a thrilling, almost mythical quality, a challenge to be conquered. The days leading up to their arrival were a blur of excitement. They meticulously packed and rechecked their gear, their vehicle laden with emergency supplies, extra water, and every conceivable item for survival and comfort in the wilderness. Daniel, ever the planner, had traced their intended hiking routes with a highlighter, cross-referencing GPS coordinates with old-school topographical maps. Sarah ensured their first aid kit was fully stocked, and Ethan, with a sense of immense responsibility, was tasked with organizing the snacks, his small hands carefully arranging energy bars and dried fruit. The air in the car on those final approach miles was thick with anticipation, a palpable hum of shared joy and optimistic wonder. They saw themselves not as tourists but as adventurers, ready to embrace the raw, untamed spirit of the American West. Little did they know, as they drove towards the shimmering horizon, that Death Valley had a different kind of adventure in store for them, one that would redefine their lives and leave an enduring mystery in its wake. The endless ribbon of asphalt eventually gave way to a landscape that defied ordinary comprehension, and the Harpers finally arrived at the threshold of Death Valley National Park. The transition was immediate and visceral. The familiar greens and browns of the Californian highways receded, replaced by a canvas of stark, sun-baked earth, jagged, ancient mountains, and shimmering mirages that danced on the distant horizon. The air, which had been merely warm a few hours prior, now felt like a physical presence, dry and searing, a breath stolen from a colossal furnace. Yet, despite the oppressive heat that immediately pressed in on them, a strange reverence settled over the family. This was not merely a hot place, it was a geological masterpiece, a testament to time and erosion, a landscape of raw, unyielding beauty that demanded respect and silence. Their vehicle, once a comfortable bubble of air-conditioned normalcy, now felt like a fragile shell traversing an alien world. As they drove deeper into the park, past the iconic Badwater Basin and the Devil's Golf Course, the sheer scale of the desolation began to sink in. Ethan, initially captivated by the novelty of the salt flats and the bizarre rock formations, grew quieter, his usual effervescence replaced by a wide-eyed awe. He pressed his face against the window, mesmerized by the vast, empty expanses, the distant, shimmering dunes that seemed to ripple like liquid gold under the relentless sun. Daniel, ever the practical one, noted the precise temperature gauge on the dashboard, a stark number that seemed to mock the concept of comfort. He rechecked their water supply, the rows of gallon jugs a reassuring presence in the back, though even they seemed pitifully small against the enormity of the landscape. Sarah, however, found herself unexpectedly moved by the starkness. The very absence of lush vegetation, the raw, exposed earth, spoke of a primal power she hadn't anticipated. She saw beauty in the muted palette of ochres, reds, and grays, the way the light played tricks on the distant peaks, painting them in ever-shifting shades. It was a beauty that felt earned, a testament to survival in the face of unimaginable adversity. They pulled into their designated primitive campsite, a small gravel patch nestled amidst low, scrubby bushes, far from the main visitor areas. The silence that descended once the engine was turned off was profound, broken only by the distant hum of the heat and the occasional rustle of an unseen creature. It was a silence that swallowed sound, emphasizing the isolation and the vastness. As they set up their sturdy, desert-rated tent, the sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in fiery hues of orange and purple. The air, though still hot, offered a subtle, almost imperceptible softening. Daniel, with a quiet efficiency, prepared a simple meal, while Sarah helped Ethan organize their sleeping bags and backpacks inside the tent. There was a sense of shared purpose, a quiet camaraderie born of their surroundings. This was what they had come for, to strip away the complexities of modern life and connect with something more fundamental. They talked animatedly about their plans for the next day, the specific trails Daniel had meticulously mapped out, the geological formations they hoped to see, the rare desert flora they might encounter. The excitement was palpable, a bright spark against the encroaching darkness of the desert night. They believed they were ready, prepared for anything this magnificent, formidable landscape could throw at them. They were full of hopeful enthusiasm, utterly oblivious to the true nature of the challenges that lay hidden beneath the serene, star-dusted surface of Death Valley. The morning after their arrival dawned with the same relentless intensity, but there was a subtle, almost imperceptible shift in the air, a whisper of change that went unnoticed by the excited family. The sun, a molten disk climbing swiftly above the eastern ridges, promised another day of scorching heat, yet a peculiar stillness hung heavy in the atmosphere, a hushed expectation that felt different from the usual desert calm. The Harpers, however, were oblivious to these nuanced warnings. They were fueled by the vibrant energy of their adventure, their minds fixed on the planned trek, a moderate loop that Daniel had carefully selected for its scenic vistas and its manageable length for Ethan. They rose early, eager to begin before the sun reached its zenith. Daniel meticulously checked their water bladders and bottles, ensuring every container was full. Sarah packed light snacks and Ethan's favorite trail mix, while Ethan himself, his small backpack already feeling like a badge of honor, chattered excitedly about spotting a roadrunner or a desert tortoise. Their initial steps on the dusty trail were filled with an almost childlike joy. The vastness of the landscape, so intimidating upon arrival, now felt like a grand playground waiting to be explored. They admired the unique desert flora, surprisingly resilient in the harsh environment, and marveled at the intricate patterns etched into the rock faces by millennia of wind and water. The first few hours passed in a blissful haze of exploration, the rhythmic crunch of their boots on the gravelly path, the distant cries of unseen birds of prey, and the silent grandeur of the towering rock formations created a sense of timelessness. They paused frequently for photos, capturing Sarah's radiant smile against a backdrop of red cliffs, Daniel's contemplative gaze across a sprawling vista, and Ethan's triumphant stance atop a small, climbable boulder. These were moments of pure, unadulterated family happiness etched forever into their memories, though they didn't know then just how precious and fleeting those memories would become. Then, without warning, the desert's temperament shifted dramatically. A faint, distant murmur, almost like a low growl, began to emanate from beyond the jagged peaks to the west. It grew steadily, rapidly transforming into a howling gale that swept across the basin. Fine sand, initially just a nuisance, quickly became a blinding, stinging assault. The clear, azure sky morphed into an ominous, churning ochre, as a colossal wall of dust rolled towards them with terrifying speed. Daniel, his face tight with concern, immediately understood the gravity of the situation. A full-blown haboob, a desert sandstorm of immense proportions, was bearing down on them. Panic, swift and cold, began to coil in Sarah's stomach. "Daniel, what do we do?" she cried over the rising roar of the wind. He tried to remain calm, his training kicking in. "Stay close. Find shelter. We need to get low," he shouted, his voice barely audible above the tempest. They stumbled forward, fighting against the powerful gusts, their visibility rapidly diminishing to mere feet. The landscape that had seemed so magnificent moments before now turned into a disorienting, suffocating trap. Grains of sand, propelled by the furious wind, stung their exposed skin and clogged their eyes, noses, and mouths. In the chaos, Sarah, her hand clutching Ethan's tightly, managed to pull out her satellite phone. A gift from her parents, a small concession to their anxiety, rarely used but always charged. It was the only way to reach anyone from such a remote location, as cell service was non-existent. Through the roaring wind and the suffocating dust, she frantically dialed her friend, a lifeline to the world they were rapidly losing sight of. Her voice, strained and hoarse, managed to convey only a few fragmented words. Sandstorm. Losing light. Can't see. Death Valley. The connection, tenuous at best, crackled and then died, swallowed by the static of the storm. It was the last communication anyone would receive from the Harper family. As the sandstorm engulfed them completely, stripping away all sense of direction and time, a profound, chilling silence descended on the vast, empty expanse where they had been. The roaring wind was the only sound, a primal scream of the desert claiming its domain. When the storm eventually subsided, hours later, leaving behind a reshaped landscape of freshly sculpted dunes and erased trails, there was no trace of the Harpers. Their vehicle remained at the remote campsite, patiently waiting, but the family themselves had vanished, swallowed whole by the relentless sands and the unforgiving heart of Death Valley. The only evidence of their presence was the memory of a garbled, desperate phone call, a faint echo in the void that would haunt those who loved them for years to come. The immediate aftermath of the sandstorm was a surreal tableau of calm after chaos. As the last swirling dust settled, leaving a thick, reddish film over everything, the silence that returned to Death Valley was no longer serene. It was heavy, oppressive, a profound emptiness that seemed to absorb all sound, all hope. The colossal storm had not merely passed. It had wiped the slate clean, erasing any faint traces of the Harpers' passage. Search and rescue teams, notified by Sarah's desperate, fragmented call and the growing alarm of her friend, mobilized with impressive speed, given the remote and challenging terrain. Helicopters, their rotors beating a frantic rhythm against the indifferent sky, crisscrossed the air above the last known coordinates, their powerful lights cutting through the lingering haze. Ground crews, a mix of seasoned park rangers, dedicated volunteers, and even local law enforcement, fanned out on foot and in rugged ATVs, meticulously sweeping the resculpted dunes and newly exposed rock formations. But the vastness of Death Valley swallowed their efforts whole. Every crevice was explored, every dune crest surveyed, every faint depression scrutinized. Days bled into weeks, each sunrise bringing renewed determination, each sunset deepening the gnawing despair. The Harpers' rented SUV remained parked at their primitive campsite, a silent sentinel baking under the sun, its untouched state a stark, chilling testament to their sudden disappearance. Inside, their neatly packed luggage, a half-eaten bag of Ethan's trail mix, and Sarah's discarded paperback novels seemed to mock the frantic search. No footprints led away from the vehicle, no sign of a struggle, no indication of foul play. It was as if they had simply stepped out of existence, dissolved into the very air. The official reports offered bleak possibilities. The prevailing theory centered on the sandstorm itself. Perhaps they had been disoriented, lost their way, and succumbed to exposure or dehydration before the storm even fully hit, their bodies quickly buried by the shifting sands. The sheer power of a haboob was well known to those familiar with the desert. It could easily disorient and overwhelm even experienced hikers. Another, less hopeful theory whispered of them getting hopelessly lost, wandering into an impassable canyon or a hidden, deadly crevice from which escape was impossible. The sheer scale of the park, with its countless uncharted nooks and crannies, made such a scenario tragically plausible. Back in their small Pennsylvania town, the news sent shockwaves of disbelief and then a crushing wave of grief. Daniel's parents, stoic and reserved, became gaunt shadows of their former selves, their days consumed by agonizing phone calls and the desperate hope for a miracle. Sarah's parents, more outwardly emotional, clung to each other, their tears a constant stream, their dreams of future family gatherings shattered. Ethan's young friends, initially confused, slowly came to grasp the terrifying reality, their innocent questions giving way to bewildered silence. Candlelight vigils were held, prayers offered, and local news channels ran endless stories, juxtaposing cheerful family photos with the grim, unforgiving images of the desert. As weeks turned into months, and months into a full, agonizing year, the official search efforts dwindled. The vast resources required to comb such an immense and challenging landscape were finite, and without any new leads, the probability of finding survivors became infinitesimally small. The Harpers' case was eventually classified as an unsolved missing persons mystery, filed away in dusty archives alongside countless other desert disappearances. The quiet house in Pennsylvania, once vibrant with laughter and the promise of adventure, now stood silent, a poignant monument to a family that had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only the echo of their desperate last communication and the pervasive, chilling despair of the unknown. Death Valley, indifferent and eternal, had claimed another secret, adding the Harpers to its long, silent roster of the lost. The relentless cycle of seasons continued, indifferent to the gaping void left by the Harpers' disappearance. 13 years peeled away, one after another, like the parched layers of a desert onion, each year further obscuring the faint outlines of hope. In the small Pennsylvania town, the initial outpouring of grief and frenzied speculation eventually receded, replaced by a dull, persistent ache in the collective memory. The Harpers' house, once so full of life, stood vacant for a time, a silent testament to their vanished existence. Eventually, it was sold, its windows reflecting the quiet street, its walls no longer echoing with the sounds of a family. For Daniel's and Sarah's parents, the passage of time brought no solace, only a deeper, more profound weariness. They had endured the agonizing uncertainty, the crushing weight of not knowing. Every phone call, every unexpected knock at the door, for years sparked a flicker of desperate hope, only to be extinguished by disappointment. They clung to the most mundane details of their children's lives, revisiting old photo albums, tracing the outlines of smiling faces that seemed to belong to another lifetime. They remembered Ethan's infectious laugh, Sarah's vibrant spirit, Daniel's quiet strength. These memories, once a source of comfort, now carried the sharp edges of what was lost. The official file on the Harper family, thick with maps, search reports, and witness statements, lay dormant in a dusty cabinet at the National Park Service headquarters, occasionally reviewed by a new ranger but never yielding new insights. The desert, with its vast, indifferent silence, held its secrets tightly. Experienced search and rescue personnel, hardened by years of confronting nature's unforgiving power, often spoke of the Death Valley case in hushed tones, a grim reminder of how quickly and completely the wilderness could consume those who underestimated it. For them, it was a tragedy, a closed case, a testament to the unpredictable fury of the elements. Yet, even as the world moved on and the memory of the Harper family faded into the background of local lore, a lingering question persisted for those who cared most. How could 3 people, even caught in a powerful storm, simply vanish without a trace? No bodies, no discarded equipment beyond their campsite, no signs of animal interference, no evidence of struggle or foul play. The sheer completeness of their disappearance defied simple explanation. It fueled a quiet, persistent anxiety for their remaining family, a constant low hum of what-ifs and unspoken fears. They had long since given up on finding them alive, accepting the cruel hand of fate that Death Valley had dealt. But the human heart, even in despair, craves closure, and for the Harper family's loved ones, that closure remained elusive, trapped somewhere beneath the shifting sands and ancient rocks of the vast, silent wilderness. The desert held its secrets, guarding them with an impenetrable indifference until the day its silence would finally be broken by an unforeseen discovery. 13 years after the Harpers' disappearance, as the desert relentlessly reclaimed any fleeting human imprint, the vast, unforgiving landscape of Death Valley continued to draw those with an insatiable hunger for raw, untamed nature. Among them were Mike and Chloe, a duo whose shared passion for extreme exploration transcended mere tourism. They weren't casual sightseers, they were dedicated adventurers drawn to the most remote and challenging corners of the world's harshest deserts. Mike, with his lean, wiry frame and sun-weathered face, possessed an encyclopedic knowledge of desert survival, honed over countless expeditions. Chloe, equally tenacious, brought a sharp intellect and an uncanny ability to navigate by instinct, often sensing subtle shifts in terrain or atmosphere that others might miss. Their latest undertaking was a meticulously planned, multi-day traverse of a particularly isolated and rarely visited section of Death Valley. This wasn't a designated trail or a popular viewpoint. It was a labyrinth of ancient, unnamed canyons, a desolate expanse that stretched for miles, known only to a handful of experienced desert rats and geological surveyors. They craved the untouched, the profound silence of a place where humanity felt like an improbable anomaly. Their gear was state-of-the-art: advanced GPS devices, satellite communication equipment, lightweight but durable camping gear, and meticulously calculated water and food rations. They understood the inherent dangers of the desert, respecting its power even as they sought to push their own limits within its embrace. Unlike many who ventured into such harsh environments, Mike and Chloe harbored no illusions of conquering nature. Their approach was one of deep respect, almost a communion with the ancient forces that shaped these lands. They moved with a quiet efficiency, their senses heightened, absorbing every detail. The intricate patterns of wind-blown sand, the silent soaring of a distant raven, the faint whisper of air through a narrow slot canyon. They often found themselves speaking in low tones, almost as if to avoid disturbing the profound stillness that surrounded them, a stillness that had swallowed so many secrets over the millennia. On this particular expedition, they had intentionally chosen a route that veered far from any established path, relying on a combination of old geological survey maps and their own accumulated experience. They sought out hidden springs, followed the dry washes of ancient floods, and scrambled over jagged ridges, their objective being to document unique rock formations and study rare desert succulents. Each day was a testament to their endurance and their unwavering commitment to their shared passion. They reveled in the physical challenge, the mental fortitude required to push through discomfort, and the unparalleled beauty of a landscape few eyes had ever truly seen. As they ventured deeper into the forgotten canyons, far beyond the reach of any human presence, they carried with them the collective knowledge of their past expeditions and an acute awareness of the desert's capacity for both breathtaking beauty and sudden, unforgiving peril. They were keenly aware of the inherent risks, but their respect for the environment was balanced by an unwavering confidence in their preparedness and their partnership. They were not searching for anything in particular, only the thrill of discovery that came with venturing into the unknown. Yet the desert, in its own enigmatic way, had a discovery waiting for them, a hidden truth buried beneath years of silence, a secret that would soon shatter the quiet solitude of their journey and ripple across the very fabric of time. They were about to stumble upon something that the relentless sun and the shifting sands had guarded for far too long. The scorching midday sun beat down on Mike and Chloe, relentless and unforgiving, as they navigated a particularly desolate stretch of the Death Valley wilderness. They had spent hours scaling a jagged, unnamed ridge. The rock faces a kaleidoscope of muted browns and grays, punctuated by the occasional flash of shimmering mica. Their eyes, though accustomed to the desert's stark beauty, were constantly scanning, searching for geological anomalies, for anything that might offer a new perspective on this ancient land. They moved with the practiced ease of seasoned explorers, their packs heavy but well-balanced, their steps sure-footed even on the loose scree. It was Mike who spotted it first, not with a conscious search, but with the casual glance of a person intimately familiar with their surroundings. Tucked away in a fold of the rock, almost perfectly camouflaged by its natural surroundings, was a subtle discontinuity, a slight discoloration in the rock, a barely perceptible shift in the alignment of the strata. It looked, at first glance, like nothing more than a weathered fissure, one of countless thousands that marred the canyon walls. But something about its symmetry, the way a few smaller, oddly shaped rocks seemed almost deliberately placed, caught his eye. He stopped, raising a gloved hand to shield his eyes from the glare, and squinted. Chloe, noticing his sudden stillness, paused a few paces behind him. "See something?" she asked, her voice a low murmur against the vast silence. Mike didn't reply immediately. He took a few steps closer, his gaze fixed on the anomaly. It wasn't a natural formation. The desert was full of surprising patterns, but this one felt constructed, however crudely. The rocks forming the mouth of the fissure were larger than the surrounding debris, and they seemed to fit together with an unnerving precision, almost like a clumsy attempt at masonry. There was no visible path leading to it, no sign that any human had ever trod this particular stretch of ground. It was hidden, deliberately so. "Look at this," he said, gesturing towards the spot. Chloe moved beside him, her keen eyes quickly grasping what he'd noticed. "That's odd," she mused, her brow furrowed. "Too regular for natural erosion, almost like someone tried to block it up." The opening itself was narrow, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through if the larger stones were moved. It suggested a small cave or perhaps just a shallow overhang. The desert was riddled with such features, often providing vital shelter from the sun or sudden storms for wildlife. But the meticulous, almost deliberate concealment of this particular spot was what intrigued them. It spoke of human hands and a human intention. Driven by a surge of professional curiosity, a desire to understand the hidden narratives of the wilderness, Mike began to carefully dislodge the outermost stones. They were heavy, weathered by years of sun and wind, but they yielded to his determined efforts. Chloe helped, clearing away the smaller rocks and debris that had accumulated over what seemed like an eternity. As they worked, a faint, earthy scent, distinct from the dry mineral tang of the desert, began to emanate from the opening. It was the smell of confined air, of decay, and of something else. Something human, something long stagnant. With the final large stone removed, the opening was just wide enough for a person to crawl inside. A small, dark cavity, barely illuminated by the harsh desert light, lay before them. The air inside felt cool and still, a sharp contrast to the blistering heat outside. A sense of hushed expectation, a prickle of unease, settled between them. This wasn't just a natural cave, it was a space that had been occupied and intentionally hidden. They were about to step into a pocket of time, a secret held captive by the relentless desert for years. What lay within that silent, dusty chamber, they could only begin to imagine. The veil of the unknown, woven by 13 years of silence, was about to be torn. The beam of Mike's headlamp cut through the suffocating darkness of the small cave, revealing a scene frozen in time, untouched by the desert's relentless elements for what felt like an eternity. The air inside, thick with the scent of dust, dry earth, and something indefinably stale, hung heavy and still. It was a stark contrast to the blazing sun and swirling dust outside, a forgotten pocket of the world. Chloe followed him in, her own headlamp illuminating the contours of the rough-hewn chamber. The cave was small, no more than 10 feet deep and half that in width, barely large enough for 2 adults and a child to shelter in discomfort. Their eyes, accustomed to the bright glare of the desert, adjusted slowly to the gloom, taking in the sparse, unsettling details. Scattered across the dusty floor were the tattered remnants of what might have once been a small camp. A heavily faded, torn piece of what looked like a nylon tarp lay crumpled in one corner, its vibrant color long bleached out by time and perhaps the insidious seep of sun through cracks in the rock. Nearby, a corroded, rusted metal canteen lay on its side, a dark stain of what was once water marking the dust beneath it. A few unidentifiable, brittle fragments of what could have been food wrappers lay scattered, reduced to mere husks. A prickle of unease ran down Chloe's spine. This was more than just a temporary shelter. It bore the signs of a desperate, prolonged stay. The stillness inside the cave was profound, a silence that felt heavy with untold stories. It was the silence of lives abruptly interrupted, of voices extinguished. Mike's headlamp then caught on something more substantial, tucked partially beneath a low overhang in the rock wall. It was a backpack, or what remained of one. Its fabric, once brightly colored, was now a dull, sun-bleached husk, stiff and brittle to the touch. He reached for it carefully, his fingers brushing against the rough material. It yielded slightly under his touch, collapsing in on itself. He pulled it out gently, the faint smell of decay and something distinctly human wafting from it. As he brought it into the stronger light, he saw that its contents had largely perished. A few disintegrating articles of clothing, a child's worn shoe, and a small faded plastic toy, perhaps a miniature dinosaur, were barely discernible. But nestled deep within one of its interior pockets, remarkably preserved by the dry, arid conditions, was a small, oblong object. It was a metallic container, cylindrical in shape, about the size of a large thermos, but clearly designed for durability and airtight sealing. Its surface was dulled and scratched, but otherwise intact. Mike's heart began to pound with a slow, heavy rhythm. This was no ordinary find. The deliberate concealment of the cave, the lingering signs of prolonged human presence, and now this sealed container. It reeked of a hidden purpose, a desperate attempt to preserve something vital. He exchanged a knowing glance with Chloe, whose expression mirrored his own mix of apprehension and growing excitement. They both understood the immense implications of such a discovery in a place where people simply vanished without a trace. With careful hands, Mike twisted the lid of the container. It opened with a faint hiss, a release of air that had been trapped for years. Inside, tightly rolled and wrapped in what appeared to be heavy-duty plastic sheeting, were several items. He gently pulled out a small stack of photographs, their colors faded but still discernible, showing a smiling family. A man, a woman, and a young boy. The man's face, earnest and kind, the woman's vibrant and warm, the boy's full of innocent joy. And then, nestled beneath the photos, several tightly bound notebooks. The first few pages were water-stained and brittle, but as he carefully unrolled them, a familiar script emerged, handwritten in ink that had miraculously withstood the passage of time. It was a diary. And as he scanned the first legible lines, a chill that had nothing to do with the cave's coolness crept over him. This was not just a historical relic, it was a voice from the past, a silent scream echoing across 13 years of oblivion. They had not just found a cache, they had stumbled upon the last desperate testament of the Harper family. The weight of that realization settled upon them, heavy and profound. The metallic container lay open between Mike and Chloe, a small, unassuming vessel holding the weight of 13 years of silence and unspeakable tragedy. With trembling hands, Mike carefully unrolled the first notebook. The pages, though brittle with age, had been remarkably preserved by the container's airtight seal and the desert's dry embrace. The ink, faded but still legible, revealed the delicate, flowing script of Sarah Harper. The initial entries were mundane, filled with the joyful anticipation of their adventure. She wrote of their departure from Pennsylvania, the changing landscapes, Ethan's infectious excitement at every new sight. Her words painted a vivid picture of a family united by a shared dream, their days filled with laughter and the quiet contentment of being together. She detailed their route, their stops at roadside diners, the awe inspired by the Grand Canyon's immensity, all leading up to their final grand destination, Death Valley. "Daniel is so meticulous he's planned every mile," one early entry read. "Ethan is practically vibrating with excitement. He calls himself the Desert Explorer. I just hope we're not underestimating this place. It's so vast, so silent." Then the tone began to shift, subtly at first. An entry described their arrival in the valley, the oppressive heat, the stark beauty. Sarah wrote of the raw, untamed power of the landscape, hinting at a growing sense of unease beneath her enthusiasm. "It's truly breathtaking, but also a little intimidating. It feels like a place where time stands still and where anything can happen, for good or ill." The next entries detailed their hike into the designated area, the initial thrill of the walk, the majestic views. But then, abruptly, the narrative fractured. Sarah's handwriting became more frantic, the lines less even, the ink sometimes smudged as if written in haste or distress. She described the sudden, terrifying onset of the sandstorm, the blinding dust, the disorienting wind that whipped them around like rag dolls. Her words conveyed the sheer terror of being caught in nature's unleashed fury, of struggling to protect Ethan as Daniel fought to maintain their bearings. "The storm hit so fast, we were just walking, and then a wall of dust. Daniel shouted, 'Stay low!' Ethan was crying, clinging to me. I thought we were going to be buried alive." The subsequent entries chronicled their desperate struggle for survival. How Daniel, with a primal instinct for protection, had somehow guided them through the blinding chaos, stumbling upon the hidden fissure in the rock just as their strength was failing. Sarah vividly described the sheer relief of finding the small cave, their temporary sanctuary from the raging storm. It was a place of profound darkness and unexpected coolness, a literal lifesaver. We huddled together, barely breathing. The sand roared outside like a living beast. This little cave, it saved us. It's a miracle, truly. But now, we're trapped. The entries then focused on their immediate predicament. The sandstorm had sealed the cave entrance, blocking their escape. They had limited water and food, their supplies dwindling with each passing hour. Sarah chronicled their attempts to dig themselves out, Daniel's relentless but fruitless efforts against the tons of sand and rock. She wrote of their growing desperation, the creeping realization that no one knew exactly where they were. Her calls on the satellite phone had been cut off. Hope, which had initially burned bright, began to flicker. Daniel's trying to clear the entrance, but it's hopeless. So much sand. We're rationing water. Ethan is so brave, but I can see the fear in his eyes. How long can we last? The most heartbreaking entries were those about Ethan. Sarah described his resilience, his small acts of bravery, his attempts to lighten their spirits with whispered stories and drawings in the dust. She spoke of her fierce maternal instinct to protect him, to shield him from the terrifying reality of their situation. Her words were a raw, unfiltered outpouring of a mother's love, intertwined with a profound sense of helplessness. Ethan drew us a picture of a giant rescue helicopter today. My heart breaks for him. He asks when we'll go home. What do I tell him? We just need to hold on. Please, someone find us. The final entries in Sarah's diary became increasingly fragmented, scrawled in faint, almost illegible lines. Her strength was clearly failing. She wrote of the suffocating heat returning to the cave, the gnawing hunger, the overwhelming thirst. Her last few sentences were a desperate plea, a mother's final message to anyone who might someday find it. Water, gone. Daniel is weak. Ethan, so quiet now. My boy, find him, please. My son. The entry abruptly ended. A haunting silence left in its wake. Mike and Chloe exchanged a horrified look. The story wasn't just a tale of survival, but of a slow, agonizing decline. The implication was clear. Sarah Harper had not survived. The metallic container, once a symbol of hope, now felt like a mausoleum, holding the echoes of a mother's last, desperate plea. But there were still more notebooks, still more pages to turn, and the mystery, far from being solved, had only deepened. Who had written the other books? And what had truly become of Daniel and, more importantly, young Ethan? The desert had given up one secret but held many more. The final, heartbreaking words of Sarah Harper's diary hung in the cool, stale air of the cave, a chilling testament to her final moments. Mike and Chloe sat in stunned silence, the flickering beams of their headlamps dancing on the ancient rock walls. The initial shock of finding the diary was now compounded by the profound sorrow of understanding the agonizing fate of a young mother. Yet, as the despair settled, a new, urgent question emerged. What had happened to Daniel and, more critically, to Ethan? Sarah's last plea, "My boy, find him. Please, my son," resonated with a desperate clarity, demanding an answer. Carefully, Mike reached for the next notebook in the container. This one was smaller, a field journal perhaps, and its cover bore the faint, water-stained imprint of a name. D. Harper. The handwriting within was distinctly different from Sarah's elegant script. Bolder, more angular, often rushed. Daniel's entries began abruptly after Sarah's final words, filled with a raw, guttural grief that even the dry ink couldn't conceal. He described the agonizing hours following Sarah's passing, his desperate attempts to cling to hope while staring at the grim reality of their situation. The cave, once a sanctuary, had become a tomb. "She's gone, my beautiful Sarah. I don't know how we're going to survive this. Ethan, he just stares at me. His eyes are so big, so full of questions I can't answer." His entries detailed the grim, almost impossible task of continuing to live within the confines of their rock prison. He described rationing their last drops of water, the gnawing hunger, and the relentless, almost tangible weight of despair. Yet, through it all, a single, powerful motivation drove him. Ethan. Daniel chronicled his son's fragile state, his growing weakness, but also his remarkable resilience. Ethan, despite everything, would sometimes hum a tune or try to sketch in the dust with a twig, a tiny spark of light in their suffocating darkness. "Ethan is so weak, but he smiled today. A real smile. I have to find a way. For him. I have to get him out of here." The bulk of Daniel's entries focused on his renewed, desperate efforts to clear the cave entrance. He wrote of scraping at the sand with his bare hands, of trying to dislodge rocks too heavy for him to move, of the crushing frustration of failure. He meticulously documented the dwindling supplies, the slow passage of time marked only by the shifting light filtering from cracks above. His words were a poignant blend of meticulous observation and profound psychological torment, the mind of a man pushed to the very brink. Then there was a sudden, jarring shift in the narrative. Several pages appeared to be missing, torn out, or lost. The next legible entry, scrawled in an even more desperate hand, spoke of a decision, a last, desperate gamble. "I can't stay here, we'll die. Both of us. I have to try, I have to find help. I've seen something. A small opening, high above, towards the ridge. If I can reach it, maybe I can find a way out. I have to try. For Ethan." The implication was chilling. Daniel had decided to leave the cave, to attempt a perilous escape, leaving his young son behind with the faint hope of returning with rescue. It was a choice born of absolute desperation, an unthinkable gamble that only a father pushed beyond all limits could make. His subsequent entries, though few, described his torturous ascent, the brutal sun, the treacherous terrain, his body screaming in protest. "Almost there, so tired, but I can see the valley floor from here. If I can just get over this last ridge, I have to get back for him. My boy, Ethan." The last legible lines in Daniel's journal were fragmented, almost incoherent, scrawled in a barely recognizable hand as if written with his last reserves of strength. They spoke of disorientation, of an unbearable thirst, of the vast, mocking indifference of the desert. And then, silence. His narrative ended, leaving the reader with a stark, terrifying image of a father fighting to the very last breath for his child. Mike carefully placed Daniel's notebook down. Their gaze shifted to the smallest, thinnest notebook in the container. Its cover was adorned with crude, colorful drawings. A stick figure family, a lopsided sun, a smiling animal. This was Ethan's notebook. And as Mike gently opened it, his eyes fell upon drawings of the cave, of his parents, and then, chillingly, of himself alone, a small figure against a vast, empty landscape. There were simple, childish words scrawled next to some of the drawings, disjointed phrases that whispered of an unimaginable, solitary existence. Mommy, sleeping. Daddy gone. Alone now. Sun, too hot. Find me. The realization hit them like a physical blow. Daniel had left the cave, but he had not returned. And Ethan had been left behind. The boy, at just 9 years old, had apparently survived his father's departure, living in the cave, completely alone, for an unknown period. The final pages of Ethan's notebook contained not only his drawings, but also a series of faint, almost indecipherable symbols, crude markings that looked like a child's attempt at a map, or perhaps a message of desperate hope, pointing to some new, terrifying reality. The container had given up its secrets, but the most profound mystery remained. What had truly become of young Ethan Harper, the boy who had survived the inferno, only to be left behind in the vast, silent crucible of Death Valley? The revelation of Ethan's notebook, with its poignant drawings and fragmented, almost incoherent scrawls, sent a fresh wave of horror through Mike and Chloe. The realization that a 9-year-old boy had likely endured the unimaginable torment of solitary survival in this desolate cave, after witnessing the death of his mother and the desperate departure of his father, was almost too much to bear. The air in the cave, already heavy with the past, seemed to thicken with the ghost of a child's despair. But as they meticulously examined the final brittle pages, their initial shock gave way to a surge of professional curiosity and a sliver of desperate hope. Amidst the childlike scribbles and faded drawings, a recurring pattern emerged. Crude lines, circles, and jagged shapes began to coalesce into what appeared to be a rudimentary map. It wasn't a surveyor's chart or even a typical hiking map, but a series of symbols and faint directional arrows that seemed to indicate a path, a sequence of landmarks only a child might have recognized or created. One drawing depicted a large, oddly shaped rock formation outside the cave, followed by a zigzagging line leading to what looked like a narrow canyon. Another showed a small, squat cactus, then a dotted line trailing off towards a distant, flat expanse. There were repetitive symbols of a sun, often crossed out, and a small, almost imperceptible drawing of a human figure. It was a child's attempt to articulate a journey, a desperate plea for understanding, perhaps even a secret hope. He tried to map it, Chloe whispered, her voice barely audible, tracing a finger over one of the more distinct lines. He drew a path, maybe where he went or where he thought he could go. Mike leaned in closer, his expert eye immediately recognizing the nuances of the landscape depicted. Even in a child's hand, the unique geological features of Death Valley were unmistakable. The flat-topped mesas, the distinctive erosion patterns on the canyon walls, the subtle slopes of the alluvial fans. They were all there, translated through the filter of a frightened yet determined young mind. This looks like a route out of this canyon system, Mike murmured, his voice laced with a newfound excitement, carefully comparing the child's map to his own advanced GPS and topographical charts. It's incredibly rough, almost indecipherable, but there are key features he's picked out, features that would lead away from here towards flatter ground, perhaps even closer to the main road. The implications were staggering. Could this crude, whispering map be a clue, a faint beacon pointing to Ethan's ultimate fate? It suggested not a final resting place within the cave, but a continued, desperate struggle for survival. A child's attempt to follow his father's footsteps, or perhaps to find a new path entirely. They spent the next several hours in the eerie silence of the cave, painstakingly digitizing every line, every symbol, every possible clue from Ethan's notebook. Using their portable satellite communication device, they transmitted the images and their initial analysis to the park rangers and a network of missing persons experts they knew. The response was immediate, a flurry of shocked inquiries and urgent instructions. The find was unprecedented. A family lost for 13 years, and now the potential, however remote, of a survivor's last known trajectory. The discovery shifted the entire paradigm of the Harper case. What had long been considered a closed chapter, a tragic tale of nature's overwhelming power, was now flung wide open. The small, unassuming container had become a portal to a hidden truth, revealing not just the agonizing end of Daniel and Sarah, but the incredible, heart-wrenching possibility that Ethan had endured beyond their worst fears. The desert, which had so long held its secrets tight, was finally beginning to yield them, one agonizing, hopeful clue at a time. The whispers of the past, carried on the dry desert air, were now coalescing into a desperate plea, a child's map leading towards an uncertain yet profoundly compelling future. The transmission from Mike and Chloe's satellite device ignited a wildfire of activity within the Death Valley National Park Service, reverberating all the way to federal agencies. The cold case of the Harper family, long since relegated to the dusty shelves of unsolved mysteries, was abruptly yanked into the harsh light of renewed urgency. Ethan's crude map, meticulously analyzed and cross-referenced with modern topographical data, became the cornerstone of a new, highly focused search operation. For the seasoned rangers who had worked the original case, or for those who had heard the grim legends, this was an almost unbelievable development, a sliver of hope emerging from a decade and a half of profound silence. Within hours, a specialized search and rescue team, comprised of the most experienced desert trackers, survival experts, and a few individuals with a deep, almost intuitive understanding of Death Valley's unforgiving terrain, was assembled. Equipped with the latest GPS technology, high-resolution aerial imagery, and even ground-penetrating radar, They converged on the general area indicated by Ethan's drawings. The task was monumental, even with the new clues. A child's interpretation of landmarks, even a remarkably observant one, could be prone to error, and the desert itself was a constantly shifting, deceptive canvas. The team moved with a silent, determined efficiency, their eyes tirelessly scanning the ground, each member acutely aware of the incredible stakes involved. They followed the faint, almost ghostly trails indicated by Ethan's sketches, a distinctive rock outcrop, a dry wash that snaked through a narrow canyon, a particularly gnarled ancient mesquite tree that seemed to defy the arid conditions. The heat was relentless, the terrain unforgiving, but the hope of finding a survivor, a child who had endured unimaginable hardship, fueled their resolve. Days passed, marked by the relentless sun and the stark beauty of the desert. The search was grueling, a test of endurance and meticulous observation. They found subtle signs that corresponded to Ethan's drawings, a small natural depression in the rock that could have offered brief shelter, a peculiar cluster of dark stones that matched a crude rendering in the notebook. Each discovery, no matter how small, was met with a surge of adrenaline, pushing them onward. Then, on the 5th day of the renewed search, just as morale began to wane under the oppressive sun, a breakthrough occurred. A veteran ranger, a man named Thomas Vance, who had spent his entire career in the remote reaches of the Southwest, found it. He was navigating a rarely explored winding dry wash that had been obscured by years of flash floods. Tucked beneath a massive, overhanging rock ledge, a natural shelter from the elements, he saw it. It wasn't a body, nor was it a direct sign of recent human presence. Instead, it was a collection of meticulously arranged pebbles, forming a crude arrow pointing further down the wash. Beside it, etched into the dust, was a faint, almost erased symbol that matched one of the recurring motifs in Ethan's diary, a simple, almost childlike drawing of a desert flower. It was a sign, unmistakable and chillingly poignant, that someone had been here and had left a message. Following the direction indicated by the pebbles, the team pressed on. The canyon narrowed, its walls rising steeply, offering rare patches of shade. The air grew cooler, hinting at a hidden water source. As they rounded a sharp bend, a small, vibrant green patch of vegetation emerged from the stark rock, a testament to a seeping spring, a life-giving oasis in the heart of the desolation. And then, nestled amidst the verdant growth, half hidden by a cluster of thorny bushes, they saw it. A makeshift shelter, ingeniously constructed from sun-bleached branches, tattered pieces of fabric, and flattened metal scraps. It was small, barely more than a lean-to, but it spoke of prolonged habitation, of an almost unbelievable tenacity. And beneath its flimsy roof, curled into a fetal position, incredibly thin but unmistakably alive, was a human form. His clothes were rags, his skin deeply tanned and weathered, his hair long and matted. He was motionless, barely breathing, but a faint, rhythmic rise and fall of his chest was visible. It was a boy, or what remained of him. It was Ethan Harper. The discovery was met with a stunned, reverent silence. After 13 years, against all odds, the desert had finally surrendered its most precious secret. The impossible had happened. The lost child had been found, a living ghost from a forgotten tragedy, a testament to the indomitable will to survive even in the face of unimaginable isolation. The glimmer in the dust had become a blazing beacon of hope. The discovery of Ethan Harper sent shockwaves far beyond the remote canyons of Death Valley. It was a story that defied belief, a testament to human resilience that captured the imagination of a nation. News channels scrambled for interviews, psychologists offered theories on the profound impact of prolonged isolation, and survival experts marveled at the sheer tenacity required to endure such an ordeal. Yet, for Ethan, the reality of his rescue was a bewildering, often overwhelming, return to a world he barely remembered. His initial days were a blur of hushed voices, gentle hands, and a barrage of medical examinations. He was severely emaciated, his body a testament to years of extreme deprivation, but miraculously, he was physically intact. The desert had stripped him down to his most fundamental form, but it had not broken him. The greatest challenges lay not in his physical recovery, but in the arduous journey of psychological reintegration. The world had changed dramatically in 13 years, and the boy who had walked into the desert was now a young man forged by solitude and the stark rules of survival. The most poignant reunion was with his bewildered, tearful grandparents, Daniel's and Sarah's parents. They had aged, their faces etched with years of grief and unanswered questions, but the moment they saw Ethan, a flicker of youthful recognition ignited in his eyes. There were no grand pronouncements, no dramatic declarations, just a raw, undeniable connection of shared blood and endured sorrow. It was a silent testament to the enduring power of family, a reunion that bridged an unimaginable chasm of time and tragedy. They enveloped him in a protective embrace, a silent promise to nurture the fragile spark of life they had so long mourned as lost. The authorities, armed with Ethan's survival, diligently followed up on the remaining clues from the Harper family's journals. Based on Daniel's final desperate entries about his attempt to reach a high ridge for help, a targeted search was launched. Several days later, a short distance from the very ridge Daniel had spoken of, his remains were discovered. He had collapsed, exhausted, and succumbed to the elements, mere hundreds of yards from a faint, seldom-used trail that might have led to rescue. It was a heartbreaking confirmation of his ultimate sacrifice, a poignant end to a father's desperate quest to save his son. The desert, in its final act of revelation, had delivered both a miracle and a profound, tragic closure. As the months unfolded, Ethan slowly, painstakingly began to adapt to his new reality. He found solace in the quiet routines of his grandparents' home, in the simple comfort of regular meals and soft beds. Therapists worked with him, gently helping him to process the trauma of his past, to articulate the unimaginable experiences he had endured. He spoke of the endless days in the cave after his father left, the gnawing hunger, the desperate search for water, and the profound, isolating silence. He recounted how he had eventually ventured out, driven by an instinct for survival, finding small, edible plants, learning to trap tiny desert creatures, and discovering the hidden spring that became his lifeline. He had learned the desert's rhythms, its warnings, its sparse offerings, becoming an almost feral inhabitant of its unforgiving landscape. His story became a beacon of hope, a reminder that the human spirit, even in its most vulnerable state, possesses an extraordinary capacity for resilience. He spoke of his parents with a quiet reverence, their faces vivid in his memory, their love a guiding force even in his deepest solitude. He carried their legacy not as a burden, but as a source of strength, a constant reminder of the sacrifices they had made for him. Years later, Ethan, now a young man fully integrated into society, pursued a life that honored his incredible journey. He became an advocate for wilderness safety and survival education, sharing his story with a profound sense of purpose. He often returned to Death Valley, not with bitterness or fear, but with a quiet respect for the landscape that had both taken so much and, against all odds, given him life. He visited the hidden cave, now marked with a small, unassuming plaque commemorating his parents, Daniel and Sarah Harper. It was a place of remembrance, but also a symbol of his own miraculous survival. The story of Ethan Harper, the boy who vanished and returned, became a modern legend, whispered around campfires and told in hushed tones in visitor centers. It was a story not just of tragedy and loss, but of the extraordinary power of the human will, a testament to the enduring flicker of hope even in the most desolate corners of the world. And in the vast, silent expanse of Death Valley, the echoes of his survival continued to resonate, a permanent, awe-inspiring presence in a landscape forever marked by his unforgettable journey.